Hey nerds, Farmer Jesse here. Welcome to Growers Daily, your daily dose of ecological farming insight. It is Wednesday, April 30th, 2025, and today we're going to talk about how to use a Broadfork properly and effectively, and we'll talk green beans and some purple ones, some yellow ones. So let's do it. All right, well, happy Wednesday, everyone. Not a ton to report on my end, honestly, but I will say that my BCS tractor started acting funny yesterday while I was mowing a bed of lettuce and spinach, which is always my favorite thing to happen at the very beginning of the season. So I'm going to have some carrots soon, though, which will make everything better. Anyway, today I want to talk green beans, and we don't grow green beans like we used to, and especially not as a market item, but I love me some green beans, and there are some ways to make them relatively profitable or at least slightly easier to grow. So I will talk about bush beans in the first segment and then pole beans in the third segment, along with some harvesting and marketing stuff along the way. What I'm not really going to talk about today is dry beans or shelling beans like edamame. I mean, unless you just stop picking the green beans, then dry beans will be the result. But yes, we can save those for another time. I do the show every day, so we get plenty of opportunities. All right, so obviously pole beans are varieties that need support, and bush beans are varieties that do not, or at least not much. Most fresh beans are called snap beans, and although most beans used to have like a string, hence string beans, many do not anymore. That said, snap beans refer to those with and without strings, which I agree is kind of confusing. The string is that fibrous thread that isn't particularly edible and is generally removed before cooking. It's no small amount of work, and anyone with a grandparent who liked to cook can attest for the hours and hours you spent stringing them for your grandparents. There is also another category called fillet beans, like the French haricots verts, which are delicious and tender, but require picking every 2 days or so versus every 5 or so for most bush beans. The varieties you choose will be up to your goals and market, but choose wisely. Now, for us, I may disappoint you a little bit with my favorite bush varieties because mine are those that are easy to pick and taste delicious. Specifically, I like the large Roma style beans that fill up a pound really quickly, and I like the Royal Burgundy beans that are purple and really easy to find and shell, though I do make sure to warn customers that the beans the purple ones will turn green when they cook. I also like to grow just a few feet of fillet beans, those haricots verts style, just to have a handful of those in a meal, like basically every day that they're in season, because they are really a treat, and I love me some good old style, French haricots verts. You all can feel free to give us your favorite bush or pole bean varieties in the comments, of course, as always. One we get asked about the most here in Kentucky is the half runner beans for canning, but we don't grow them because mostly people want them at a price we would never be able to sell, and they are better canned than fresh, in my opinion. Beans are already not super profitable given the amount of time they take to harvest. So with the varieties I select, I like to select those that, like the large Roma or the purple, that are unique and I can charge a fair price for them, and also they're easy to find when you're harvesting. We found the regular old green bean for $7 a pound is not super easy to sell, especially when you can get organic prepped and cooked green beans at Whole Foods for like $5 a pound right now. Anyway, we have started green beans in trays to beat the season before, but directly seeding them is generally the way to go, just putting them straight into the soil. Beans should be seeded when the temperature outside is warmed a bit, say like that 60 or so degrees Fahrenheit on average, or 16 degrees Celsius. If you do want to sow them earlier to try and beat the season, sow slightly denser than the typical recommendations and cover with a row cover or something. That will help trap in some of that heat. The reason being that germination may be low if the soil is cool, so that's why you'd want to put them in denser. Also, before sowing, you can consider inoculating the beans with commercial rhizobia. They sell these at like Johnny's or wherever you're buying your beans, most likely. This is the bacteria that legumes collaborate with in their root nodules to fix nitrogen. This may also help increase yield, so it's not the worst idea. I also find it doesn't hurt in terms of germination to pre-soak the beans overnight in a warm area in a compost extract, and then let them dry for a little bit before sowing them, called seed priming. Now, every seed is going to be a little different, but generally you want to account for 2 rows on either side of a 30-inch bed, 75-centimeter bed, or one right down the middle if you don't need that many beans. Then plan for landing a bean every 2 to 4 inches, so that'd be like 5 to 10 centimeters. Again, go slightly denser if it's still cold. Then for bush beans, there's not a lot to it. I like to add a very light amount of compost, emphasis on the very light part, because you don't want a big bushy plant and no beans. They are not super heavy feeders, but they do like a little burst to get them going and get through the potential bean beetle attacks. For harvest, if you harvest once a week or every 5 days, bush beans will generally produce for 3 or so weeks, preferably 4, depending on the variety and their health. But it's a good chore to go out there with the kids, hang out in the evening, enjoy the weather, pick some beans. I like to harvest them into totes and or like little baskets and get them cooled down quickly in the cooler where they will last, a week or more. If they are wet, try to get them dried off first so as to avoid any mold. Anyway, I'll touch a bit more on marketing in the third segment when we discuss pole beans, but first, a broad forking how-to, because why not? BRB.
Nobody knows me like you do. You just read my mind. Nobody gets me except for you, like we're intertwined. Seasons come and go.
Today's episode is brought to you by Farmhand. I started a CSA to grow food and build community, not to drown in admin work. Spreadsheets, emails, and pack lists take up too much time. If I could spend less time at my desk and more in the field, that'd be a win. Enter Farmhand. Farmhand automates billing, newsletters, websites, and member support, saving CSA farmers 20 plus hours a week. Focus on farming, not paperwork. See how Farmhand can help. Book a one-on-one demo with founder Ari at farmhand.partners/no-till. That's farmhand.partners/no-till. All right, back to the show. If you, the listener, are enjoying this content, getting even a small amount of value from it, consider supporting our work over at patreon.com/no-till-growers. I will try to get to questions from everywhere the questions come in, but I will always get to your Patreon questions. Now, today's Patreon question comes from Patreon member Bill Marshall, who writes, quote, Farmer Jesse, would you speak in more detail about broadforking? Thanks to your videos, I bought one for my 1,200 square foot home garden, all beds of which are just a few years old. I'm in Western PA, Zone 6A, yellow clay. That was a fun little rhyme there, Bill. How often do you broadfork your existing beds? What time of year and what indicators do you use to decide that compaction is sufficiently reduced and you can stop broadforking a bed? Thank you, and end quote. All right, great questions here, Bill. So first, for those of you not watching on YouTube or those of you who do not yet own your own broadfork, there are ways to use this tool well and ways to needlessly overemploy it, thus wasting a bunch of your time. I'm going to attempt to point you in the direction of the former. First, for the uninitiated, a broadfork looks like a giant dinner fork on 2 sticks with generally 4 to 6 long tines on the bottom, a bar that connects them all, and then 2 handlebars to hold on to as you pull it back. And as a tool, its purpose is to decompact and aerate the soil. Specifically on a small scale, on a large scale, a subsoiler, or typically something to that extent, is used for the same purpose. And it's intended to do so without destroying too much of the soil structure or by crushing soil aggregates in the way that a tiller or rotary plow or spader or whatever can, which you don't want to do because that effectively releases a lot of the soil organic matter in your soil. So what the broadfork looks like in practice is that you are pushing the broadfork deep into the soil, pulling back lightly to just pop the soil up a bit, and then stepping back roughly a foot or so, and then repeating the process all the way down the bed. This process allows some soil organic matter, like compost, to slip deep into the soil horizons, which can help break apart compaction and get nutrients deep into the soil. Broadforking can help just break apart hard pans that are deep in there from tractors or animals or humans or lack of plant roots or standing water, etc. Will it break apart some good guy fungal hyphae in the process? Sure, but it won't pulverize the soil, and ultimately, if you do it right, it will lead to healthier soil. And as I often say, it's a tool that should, if used right, put itself out of business on your farm, make itself effectively obsolete. So how do I use it? Well, and remember, I'm on heavy clay. In the spring, as I get a bed ready to plant, I use a piece of rebar to push it into the soil to see if that particular bed is compacted. If the rebar slides smoothly into the soil down to about 14 to 18 or so inches, that bed is good to go. No more need to broadfork. If it does not go that deep, or at least not with ease of me just pushing my body weight down on the rebar, then I broadfork. Before I do, most of the time I will add a little compost to the surface so that as I broadfork, the compost will drop down into the cracks. Typically, Typically, this broad forking is done in the spring, but kind of in those mildly drier spells, which we have not had a ton of this year. But you want to do it when the soil is not so wet that it's mucky or that the broad fork just slides through, like trying to broad fork a thick milkshake. Now, once a year is generally fine. In really compacted soils, maybe twice that first year, once between each of the first two crops in that bed. That won't be a bad idea. Then just as needed from then on. I will say I found a couple of spots in our garden this year that were mostly fine last year, but seemed a little more compacted this year, or at least that's what it felt like. Why were they suddenly compacted again? I'm honestly not sure, though. The hard ice freeze we had in January killed some of the cover crops I'd planted there, or I'd planned to have there. So maybe that was had something to do with it, or perhaps I've changed my tolerance for compaction, or maybe I just didn't grow enough crops in those areas last year. Also, you cannot check for compaction in clay when the soil is too wet because it will give you a false reading because it's easier to poke through wet clay than moist clay with rebar. So the moisture last year may have had something to do with it. Hard to say. But I checked those spots like normal and broad forked them in hopes that I won't have to do that again, or at least not for a while. Like everything in farming, just don't go at it dogmatically. Like, this is what I want my soil practices to be, and so I'm not going to do X and I am going to do Y or whatever. Instead, just ask the soil what it needs at that moment and give it that, which may indeed be a broad forking. Bill also asked about indicators, and beyond compaction, just crop performance, especially cover crops, because they can be great indicators of poor soil health. If they're short and or yellow and not vigorous, that makes me think that bed could use a little assistance from the broad fork for the subsequent crop, at least, and if not, maybe some compost or something for nitrogen. I have also broad forked the cover crops in situ, like broad fork them when they are a few inches tall, but haven't yet noticed or recorded any meaningful changes from that. Anyway, I hope that helps a bit. Otherwise, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll get back to beans. Pole beans, though. Be right back.
Today's episode is also brought to you by FarmRaise. Still using QuickBooks for your farm's bookkeeping? You're wasting time and losing money. Farm finances can be overwhelming, but they don't have to be. FarmRaise Tracks is the all-in-one tool built just for farmers. Manage expenses, prep for taxes, run payroll, and plan for the future without spreadsheets or stress. Just clear, organized insights to keep your operation thriving. Thousands of farmers trust Tracks to make smart financial decisions all year long. It's time you did too. Use code NOTIL20, that's all caps, no spaces, NOTIL20 for 20% off the life of your membership at farmraise.com. All right, back to the show.
All right, and so in segment 1, we discussed bush beans, but in segment 3, we'll talk pole beans because there are a few key differences, not only in how you plant them, but obviously in the whole trellising thing and in the varieties. To be sure, there are a ton of good pole bean varieties out there, and one of my favorite things about the rural parts of Kentucky is how many areas and families have their own pole bean varieties. Most of those beans are intended for dry beans, but they almost all make good fresh or green beans too, some just being stringier than others. These, and not bush beans, are the types you would couple, or throuple, I guess, with corn and squash for Three Sisters style planting. So they would climb up a corn stalk. What a commercial gardener would do to plant these versus what a home gardener would do in terms of spacing is a bit different. For pole beans, no matter the width of your bed, you will be planting just one row. On a wider bed, perhaps you can get away with interplanting on the edges just to make the most of that space. But since you can't easily harvest the middle between the rows, one row is all that will really make sense, which is another reason why we don't bother with these on a commercial scale, to be honest. And you will want 4 or so feet between each of the rows. But anyway, so about 4 seeds per foot, or place about 3 seeds every 8 or so inches in the row, having soaked them in a compost tea and inoculated them if you were going to do that. For trellising, we have used quite a few things, actually. We've used bamboo poles on a large scale before when we were apprenticing on our apprentice farm, Bug Tussle. But that was a lot of work, though it was admittedly beautiful looking. I'm just like a gorgeous little architectural thing, which if you're watching on YouTube, you can kind of see it. I generally prefer to just pound 8-foot tall posts, T-posts in the ground every 12 or so feet, and then run a string between the posts a few inches off the ground, adding a new line every week until they are at the top of the trellis. If you're doing the bamboo posts, just plant like 5 seeds at every mound and place the posts right over the mounds so the tendrils will latch on and climb up. Make sure the trellises are very well secured, however, preferably with a third bamboo post right up the middle to hold the weight. When a bean trellis falls over, there is just not a ton that can be done to fix it, especially if the trellis broke. For all the weight and the tangled beans and stuff, it's just really tough to deal with. Next, wait until you start seeing beans, obviously, but you could be harvesting these bad boys for months, as in the right situation, they will be highly productive. And the nice thing is that at least after the initial harvest, all the harvesting can be done standing up, which versus bush beans, which must be done from the ground, or you cut the plant and you do it right in the shade, which I will do sometimes with edamame. It rules. It will save your back to grow pole beans, for sure. I don't necessarily have a favorite variety, but I like mixing in some of the yellow wax beans and larger Romano-style beans just for flavor. Now, in terms of marketing, these are niche, difficult crops and should be marketed as such. I mean, I know it's beans. I know we think beans are really prolific. They're hard to grow, hard to harvest, and do not sell yourself short on the beans, on their profitability. The big guys selling to the stores, the box stores, are all machine harvesting their beans that are bred for specific mechanical harvesters. You cannot compete with that when you're hand harvesting. So charge what they cost if you factor in all the expenses and pay yourself for labor. If you can't make it work financially, grow some for your now self and freeze the rest for your winter self. I do like beans in a CSA as a nice added summer item to break up the monotony. But again, beans take up time and space, so that has to be factored in. Also, we sold them in small quarter-pound containers, depending on the bean, and not by the pound. So if people wanted a pound, they would buy 4 containers. Would be like $8, $10, maybe even $12 a pound, depending on which bean it was. And if people complained, I just explained the cost. I didn't really apologize for what they cost to produce. It's just the nature of it. I blamed the beans. I mean, I didn't do it to their face, but you know what I mean. Anyway, thoughts on beans, pole beans, favorite varieties? Otherwise, we're going to leave it there for now, but not before a quick word from our friends at Rimmel Greenhouses. Whether you're growing tomatoes for market, flowers in the spring, or vegetables for your family, growing in a high tunnel protected from the weather provides the right environment for a harvest you can count on. Rimmel Greenhouses are strong, durable, and easy to assemble, offering the quality you need to grow productively year-round. The team of experts at Rimmel Greenhouse Systems will be your trusted partners to ensure you get exceptional value from your greenhouse or high tunnel investment. Visit Rimmel.com today to get growing. Don't forget that we here at No-Till Growers are now officially a 501c3, so donations, well, they're tax deductible and greatly appreciated. You can learn more about that in the show notes. Please make sure to like and subscribe and or follow wherever you are getting this podcast. That's an easy way to help us out as well. Enormous thank you to all of our show sponsors. And if you'd ever like to sponsor the show, you can reach out to Farmer Michelle at notillgrowers.com. Huge shouts to Willie Breeding for the theme music, Mike Hilbert for the production help and editing, and the team at No-Till Growers for their support. Also, shouts to Epidemic Sound for the background music that you can hear. Pick up a copy of the Living Soul Handbook of the Seed Farmer at notillgrowers.com to support our work. Big thank you to everyone over at patreon.com/notillgrowers, where at a certain level, or if you just bump up from one level to another, or you sign up in the month of April, you get a shout out on the show. So big shout outs today to Patrick Weaver, Alex and Oliver, Stacy Moorman, Bill King, and Chris Yates. These are our weeklies coming in clutch here to keep the story going for the week. We'll see who will step up for tomorrow. But anyway, yes, deep in the lake below where, as you will remember, a renegade group of growers is building a series of floating gardens. And they've lived, this group that lives in the water in these caves has been there for like 100 years. And they've managed to hide from regular townspeople for that whole century. But having lived below the surface for that long, these inhabitants have developed not only their own fun accents, which are really adorable, but the youngest generations have developed just a little bit of webbing between their toes for swimming, which makes them incredibly fast. They also are adroit at holding their breath for a long time, for long periods of time, and surfacing quickly without getting the bends, which is important because they find this new fruit, this thing that they hear the gardeners calling tomatoes, are growing. They're quite delicious when they turn red. I mean, when they're green, they're kind of meh. They're okay on a sandwich when you fry them, but they're delicious, that is, so long as you don't get caught. So that's tomorrow on the Thieves of Garden Island, previously known as the Mariners. Yep. All right. See you tomorrow for Thursday. It'll be awesome. Bye.